Welcome back to Axis of Truth. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're talking about what happens when a country confuses political correctness with public safety. And spoiler alert, it never ends well. In just a few minutes, we'll break down how Canada has gone from a safe and functioning democracy to a country where Jews are targeted, terror networks operate openly, and authorities seem to notice only after something goes very wrong. From ISIS plots to fire bombings to chants calling for intifada, this is not a series of isolated incidents. It's a pattern. And then I'll be joined by someone who has been warning about this for years, Goldie Ghamari, a former Canadian MPP who fled the Islamic Republic of Iran and went on to become the first woman born in Iran elected to office in Canada. But first, let's talk about something else that happened this week. I want to talk about something that doesn't matter nearly as much as it should right now to far too many people, and that is the concepts of truth and moral clarity. Now, at the Turning Point USA conference this weekend, political pundit Ben Shapiro did something that far too few people with large platforms are willing to do anymore. He spoke the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was unpopular, even when it meant calling out people on his own side from the very stage that they were about to speak from.
He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility. And that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did. He built Nick Fuentes up. And he ought to take responsibility for that, just as he ought to take responsibility for glazing pornographer and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, or for mainstreaming fake historian and pseudo-Nazi apologist Daryl Cooper as America's best and most honest popular historian. Hosts are indeed responsible for the guests they choose and the questions they ask those guests. Emotive accusations, conspiracy theories, and just guessing questions, that's lazy and stupid and misleading. None of them are a substitute for truth. None of them are a substitute for evidence. So, when Candace Owens says, "I don't know, but I know," that is retarded. And the people who refuse to condemn Candace's truly vicious attacks, and some of them are speaking here, are guilty of cowardice. Yes, cowardice.
In one speech, Ben tore apart Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly, and Nick Fuentes for their pathetic pandering to conspiracies and Jew hatred in recent years. He emphasized that if you have a platform, if you have a voice, you have an obligation to your audience to pursue the truth with evidence, not to feed them lies, not to flirt with conspiracies, not to sacrifice moral clarity for clicks and for clout. That is what accountability looks like in public figures. That is what having an ideology actually means. It means that you stand for something, even if and when it costs you. And it's a real shame to watch someone like Megyn Kelly repeatedly fail and refuse to condemn Jew hatred on the right. Silence isn't neutral, it enables. And it's deeply wrong that TPUSA continues to invite Tucker Carlson to events like AmFest, given his open betrayal of basic conservative values, including a commitment to truth and to Western liberal democracy. In fact, Qatar errand boy Tucker used his platform at AmFest to scold conservatives and accuse them of hating Muslims, even when no one present did such a thing or was even speaking about Muslims.
And what you're watching now, attacking millions of Americans because they're Muslims? It's disgusting. And I'm a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I know there's a lot of effort to claim I'm a secret jihadi. I'm not. You should not attack people on those grounds. And you're seeing it from Republicans. What the hell are you doing? What you're doing is trying to divide the country. And I've lived through 50 years of this crap. All these fake race wars that they're always promoting. Oh, go hate each other while we loot the treasury. That's exactly what's going on.
Now, outside of AmFest, we also have to talk about Candace Owens. After being criticized by Penn, she responded not with arguments, but with a bizarre Jew-hating rant, which has sort of become par for the course for Candace Owens, if we're being honest. But this one was next level.
You're obnoxious. You have absolutely no values that exist outside of the Talmud. You describe yourself as a Talmudic Jew, and I've learned what's in that Talmud, and I encourage other people at home to learn what is in that Talmud so that you know what Ben thinks of you, because he doesn't just hate me, he hates you too, white men. He hates all black people. okay? If he's following the rules of the Talmud, I mean, when I say hates, they think that we're animals, that they have a right to own us, that they have a right to make us worship them, that they have a right to lie to us, that they have a right to sue us and take everything that we have, that they have a right to deceive us, that they have a right to treat Charlie the way that he treated Charlie while he was alive. I implore you to wake up to these people who believe that they are contract lords. I challenge Black Americans to wake up to your true history, because your quarrel is not with white men, okay? Wake up to who publishes these books and keeps us warring with one another. Christians versus Christians, right? Christians versus Muslims. Wake up and learn the true history of slavery, because that wasn't exactly a white men sport, okay? Jewish people were the ones that were trading us. Jewish people were in control of the slave trade. They've buried a lot of it, but it's there, and you can find it.
She was promoting the book The Talmudic Jew by August Rohling, a 19th century Catholic polemicist whose work was exposed as fraudulent in his own lifetime. Now, Rohling could not read Talmudic, Hebrew, or Aramaic. His quotations were fabricated. His method was to strip context and to smear Judaism as a whole as morally corrupt. His book became a tool of racial anti-Semitism, later recycled by Nazis and other extremist movements. This guy literally inspired the Nazis with this work, and that's what Candace is using. Now, this isn't asking questions. This isn't even about Israel. It's about reviving a discredited Jew-hating framework that history has already judged and rejected. Candace, who is actually evil, because what she's doing is evil, is resurrecting Nazi ideas that have led directly to genocide and attempting to repackage them as brave truth-telling to a misled audience. And that is exactly what's happening on the Jew-hating right. Any and every social issue is being blamed on the Jews, thanks to a subverted narrative of perceived grievances being spoon-fed to American youth by dishonest actors like Tucker Carlson. It says to the American youth that if you aren't where you want to be, then it must be because of those Jews. Jews control the banks, the media, academia, government, everything. They must have far too much influence and must therefore be corrupt because they couldn't possibly be so successful of their own merit. They must be inherently evil. This is the ideology of a loser who blames others for their own failures, who refuses to take responsibility for their own future. And it is this loser ideology that is being repackaged by populist scumbags like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. It's old poison in new packaging in pursuit of lowering the guardrails of civilization and destroying the right and ultimately the United States from within. Ideology isn't a costume that you put on when it's convenient or to win elections. It's a set of values that binds you even when it may cost you friends or invitations or applause. It means saying no when the crowd is cheering for the wrong thing. It means drawing a line and refusing to cross it. And for those of us with platforms, with cameras and microphones and followers, this is the job. Not to entertain lies, not to mainstream hatred, not to chase viral moments at the expense of truth, but to pursue the truth relentlessly, with evidence, with history, and with moral courage. Because when we fail to do that, when we stay silent or make excuses, we're not just failing Jews, we're failing our audiences, and we're failing the very civilization or civilizations that we claim to want to defend. Well, the last few weeks, we've done a lot of deep dives into subversion of the West, from Australia to South Africa to the UK and the United States. But one country that has been rapidly spiraling into Islamism that we haven't gotten into yet is Canada. Now, since October 7th, Canada has been one of the worst places to be Jewish. In fact, during my speaking tour there, I actually felt more in danger than I had in any other country except perhaps South Africa. Tragically, we saw this past week that Canada of today isn't the Canada that we knew just a few decades ago, thanks to unchecked immigration and lax enforcement of the law. Now, over this past weekend, Canadian police arrested 3 men in Toronto in connection with a series of alleged attempted kidnappings targeting young women. Now, police said that the suspects, who were named Walid Khan, Osman Azizov, and Fahad Sadat, were ideologically motivated, and searches uncovered firearms, ammunition, and high-capacity magazines, in addition to Islamic extremist materials. Surprise, surprise. In fact, at least one of the suspects has also been charged with terrorism-related offenses linked to ISIS after investigators discovered only now from seized materials that he was seeking to murder Jews and had previously donated to ISIS. Now, while it's clear that these men should be under arrest, and I'm glad they are, why are the police only discovering by chance that people like this are funding ISIS and plotting attacks against Jews? But it's not just about the Jews. Last year, asylum seekers in Canada, a father and son, were arrested for plotting an ISIS terror attack in Toronto. And a Pakistani man who entered Canada on a visa was arrested in Quebec for plotting an ISIS attack on New York City. There is a security crisis unfolding in all of Canada, but the Jewish community is once again target number one. Much of this, of course, is related to the fact that antisemitism has exploded to unprecedented levels. Anti-Semitic incidents in Canada rose from 2,769 in 2022 to nearly 5,800 in 2023 following October 7th. In 2024, that number climbed again to over 6,200 incidents, the highest total ever recorded in Canada. In Toronto alone, Jewish people accounted for 40% of all police-reported hate crimes last year. The violence hasn't been limited to vandalism or to online threats. In the past 2 years, Canada has seen fire bombings and shootings at Jewish schools and synagogues in Montreal and Toronto, arson attacks on Jewish community buildings, and Jewish businesses targeted with graffiti and threats. Jewish parents are increasingly afraid to send their children to school. Canadian universities have also become flashpoints. Jewish students have been harassed, intimidated, and blocked from classrooms as radical Islamist camps and rallies have spread across campuses. Terrified of being dubbed Islamophobic, university administrations and the federal government have largely failed to intervene at all. Across the country, the government has also done nothing to stop the violent anti-Israel mobs from calling for the destruction of Israel, praising Hamas, or calling to globalize the Intifada for 2 years and counting. Canada has permitted its own territory to become a safe haven for extremist Islamist networks, including supporters and operatives linked to the IRGC. Despite years of warnings, the Canadian government has failed to fully crack down on the Islamic Republic's infrastructure operating inside of the country. And the result is a nation that is rapidly becoming less safe for Jews and for Canadians at large. Canada's political correctness and unchecked immigration have put all of Canada at risk, and the consequences are now playing out in real time. Now to our guest today, who actually hails from Canada, even if not originally, Goldie Ghamari. Goldie and her family escaped a brutal totalitarian Islamic dictatorship in Iran in 1986, immigrating to Canada to start a new life in a free and secular country. A former international lawyer, Goldie became the first woman born in Iran to hold public office in Canada. And while in politics, she used her spare time using her platform as an elected official to raise awareness about human rights violations in Iran, as well as educating Canadians about the very real and serious threat of Islamic terrorism and anti-Semitism in Canada. Now, Goldie was also instrumental in the designation of the IRGC as a terror group by the Canadian government, a long-fought battle. And today she also hosts The Goldie Show, which you can watch on YouTube. Goldie, it's so great to have you on the show. I wanted to for a while. Now, we've seen a pattern of brazenly Islamist activity recently surging in Canada. We've seen pro-Hamas rallies in the aftermath of October 7th in Toronto and Montreal. We've seen open praise of terrorism. We've seen even Muslim prayer protests that they've held outside some of the churches in Ottawa. Now, based on your experience as both an Iranian woman and as an MPP, how organized is this movement and how deeply penetrated are Canada's institutions?
Well, I definitely think it's incredibly organized. I mean, even on October 7, 2023, when we were just hearing about the genocidal massacre happening by Hamas terrorists in Israel, there were already people in Canada who were going out into the streets. They were celebrating en masse all of a sudden, all of these like for Palestine accounts popped up all at the same time. Toronto for Palestine, St. Paul's for Palestine, like all of these various, groups and organizations all, popped up within the span of 24 hours. So I think it is definitely very, very coordinated, very organized. You can't get that many people to come out with supplies and signs and things like that on such short notice, and yet they were able to do so. And a lot of Canadian journalists have actually investigated, and they've found a lot of financial ties to groups that are linked to terrorism. For example, the Samidun network here in Canada.
Well, you actually mentioned some of the networks. I'm going to ask more about that in a bit. We know, on the one hand, that Qatar funds a lot of the Muslim Brotherhood-aligned organizations worldwide and in Canada. And some of those groups, as you mentioned, that organize these different October 7th, I would say, celebration rallies, as well as the anti-Israel protests, have ties to Muslim Brotherhood-linked networks. Do you see a lot of influence from Qatar on the ground in Canada shaping the political messaging, the activism that we see across communities and on campuses in Canada today? And is there even any discussion about banning the Muslim Brotherhood the same way that it started to be discussed in the United States?
Well, I definitely do see the influence from Qatar. I mean, Al Jazeera and AJ Plus, which are basically the mouthpieces for the Qatari government, they are predominant everywhere in Canadian society, unfortunately. And a lot of the messaging that's being pushed out by Al Jazeera, not just in English, but in Arabic as well, we're seeing that same messaging in Canada. So there's definitely an element of influence. I think Qatari money definitely needs to be explored. We already know that Qatar has invested over $6 billion in American universities and educational institutions. I would be very curious to know how much they've invested in Canada as well. And, I think something definitely needs to be done. I'm glad that politicians in the United States are waking up to the real threat of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I have a feeling that Canada is a little bit far behind. Politicians are afraid to speak up because those who do, those who call out Islamic terrorism, are labeled as Islamophobic by the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And by the way, National Council of Canadian Muslims used to be called CARE Canada. CARE Canada was an affiliate of CARE USA, which was the largest unindicted co-conspirator in the 1991 Muslim terrorist case in the United States.
And as you know, they've now been designated as a terror group in addition to the Muslim Brotherhood by two states, Florida and Texas now. And of course, there's also discussion at the federal level as well. But I want to move to Iran. You know that the Islamic Republic has long exploited what I would say is Canada's weak enforcement for these regime-linked cultural centers, one of them in Montreal, glorifying Qasem Soleimani. Two other IRGC sympathizers, or worse, appearing at rallies, waving regime flags after October 7th, even before, but especially after. What are some of the most alarming examples that you've encountered of the influence of the Islamic regime that exists in Canada and the activities that they've conducted there on foreign soil? And is anybody in the Canadian government even doing anything about this?
Last summer, Justin Trudeau, 2 summers ago, I believe, Justin Trudeau, after 7 years of pressure from Iranian communities in Canada, from Jewish communities in Canada, and from various, groups who were fighting against the Islamic Republic, the Liberals put the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the Canadian terror list. We were very happy when that happened, but I was very concerned as well because it just seemed very performative. And unfortunately, that's exactly what it's been. So the Liberals did that, I think, in a last-bid effort to try and win a by-election in downtown Toronto. They weren't able to win it, but we haven't really seen much action from the federal government since then. Everyone knows that Canada is like a safe haven for the Islamic regime. There are many people who've come here who are affiliated with the terrorist Islamic Republic. There's huge amounts of money laundering that's happening with billions of dollars stolen from the Iranian people that's brought over. And yeah, nothing really seems to be done about it. There are numerous examples. And the one thing people have to remember is that when I speak about those who are affiliated with the Islamic Republic occupying Iran, I'm not only talking about Iranians. There are also, if anything, more non-Iranians who are involved and affiliated. We've seen, for example, various, like there's this one mosque in Windsor that is constantly honoring Qasem Soleimani or Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, right? And Hezbollah, of course, is fully funded by the Islamic Republic. So we are seeing a lot of this happening in Canada. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of action from those in power. And I mean, I can only think that the reason they don't want to act is because they're afraid of losing the jihadi vote, maybe. I don't know.
Now, when it comes to those individuals who are money laundering, who are promoting the activities of the IRGC in Canada, I mean, is the government aware? Have these things been reported? What was obviously you were not in the federal government, but when you raise some of these issues yourself, I mean, what's the reaction from Canada? Do they just ignore it? Because it's obvious that it's happening. In some cases, they even speak about it openly.
I mean, it definitely does seem like our concerns are being ignored. Now, I mean, I've read intelligence reports, publicly available intelligence reports from CSIS, from RCMP, from CBSA. They will oftentimes put out there, the CBSA, for example, said, I think it was last year, that they're investigating 700 individuals in Canada who are linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The RCMP has spoken about the national security threat that the Islamic Republic poses to Canadians. So there are, reports out there put out by government bodies. But in terms of concrete action from the Canadian Liberal government, I have not seen anything.
I mean, can they deport these people? Like, are these people who are Canadian citizens? Are they exploiting loopholes in Canada, or is Canada just ignoring it, I guess is my question.
I would say both. So some are definitely coming here, through the loopholes they've exploited, whether it's like a financial, economic immigrant where they have to invest, a certain amount of money. It's usually a very, very high amount they have to invest. Others have been here for a while and have gained citizenship. I think the best solution is to deport even the ones who have now become naturalized citizens. And I say this as someone who is a naturalized citizen myself. If you are part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or you support them in any way, I think you're a traitor to Canada and you should be deported. And if you're a citizen, then you should be denaturalized and then kicked out.
Now, I don't need to tell you, Canada has faced a wave of Islamist attacks in one form or another. You had firebombing of multiple Jewish schools in Montreal, one of them several times, Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues. You also have, of course, security warnings at Christmas markets. Both Ontario and Quebec face this from online jihadist threats. Do you see these events as part of a broader, I would say, Islamist war against Western democratic values inside of Canada? And is there a way to stop Islamization of Canada that we're seeing right now?
100%. I do believe that this is a war against the West. I mean, why else would a group of radical Muslims go stand in front of a church in Quebec City and pray in front of a church? They have mosques. They can go pray in a mosque. They're choosing to go stand in front of a church in public for a reason. And that is because public praying outside is seen as a sign of political Islam. It's seen as a sign of dominance. No one in the Middle East goes out in the streets and just randomly blocks intersections to pray. Everyone does it in mosques. In fact, in the Quran, it's banned. It's banned. You're not even supposed to pray in the road. And yet these people are coming here and they are taking advantage of the freedoms provided to those who live in Western societies to push their Islamic radical ideology. And they are pushing the boundaries. They are testing the limits of the tolerance of Canadian society. Because again, why would anyone want to go stand in front of a church, block the roads, and pray? It makes no sense unless you understand the motivation behind it. The motivation is political Islam and jihad. And yes, unfortunately, the attacks against the Jewish schools and community centers and Jewish community events is all part and parcel of this political jihad.
Now, I want to ask you as a last question. You were born in Iran, okay? So you grew up at least part of your life there before you came to Canada. How has that shaped your experience? And have you faced criticism or even condemnation for speaking the truth about the threats, both obviously to the Iranian people inside of Iran, but also now to Canadians that we see with this concerted Islamization effort by both Qatar and the Islamic regime in Iran?
So I was born in Iran, came to Canada when I was a year old. However, during my childhood, I did have an opportunity to go back several times and live sometimes for months on end in Iran. So I do have lived experience living in an Islamic dictatorship. And I would say that, yes, in fact, I have received a lot of criticism. Not from the Iranian community. Thankfully, the Iranian community, both in Canada and also in Iran, have been so incredibly supportive of me, of what I do, because I've always tried to be a voice for my community. And initially, at first, I did receive criticism from Canadians because they didn't understand why I was speaking so much about Iran or the Islamic Republic or Islamic terrorism. Because, prior to October 7, it was very difficult for people to make that connection to how, the Islamic terrorism that's happening in the Middle East is not confined to only the Middle East. It's spreading and coming to Western societies to destabilize it. After October 7, I think, especially with the rise of all this radicalism and Islamofascist behavior in Canada, as well as the very steep rise in anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, more and more Canadians started to understand why I'm speaking out about this. And now I actually have a lot of people who follow me on social media, follow me on YouTube. They listen to my messages, they share my messages, and I'm so incredibly grateful and appreciative, because I think ultimately knowledge is power. And if we want to fight back against the Islamist forces that are starting to penetrate and take over Canadian society, we have to be knowledgeable. And that's the thing they fear the most, is knowledge. And that's why they try to silence voices of people like me by accusing us of, Islamophobia. But to me, that's basically a badge of honor. It means that I'm on the right track, and that they are afraid of me, they're afraid of my voice, and they're afraid of the truth. And so I'm just going to keep on continuing what I'm doing.
It's interesting that you bring up the point about the Islamophobia accusation, because that's exactly how CARE has responded to the terror designations that they're now facing in the United States. So, of course, that is their MO. That's exactly what they go to. I think we'll leave it at that for now. We are out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us today, Goldie Ghamari, for joining us on Axis of Truth.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to wrap things up this week, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly stories of the week. Kicking things off with the good, the UK police have finally realized that maybe, just maybe, chanting for a violent uprising in the streets is dangerous. They announced they would begin arresting anti-Israel protesters for calling for intifada at their hate marches. This week, we saw the first arrests of protesters for shouting "globalize the intifada," with at least 4 arrested. Authorities also clarified they will enforce public order laws more assertively in light of violent incidents targeting Jewish communities, such as what happened in the Sydney Hanukkah massacre. Of course, we've already seen an attempt from the Qatari spin networks to claim that intifada isn't always violent, which of course is patently untrue. There is no uprising in the Arab world that is a peace movement, especially not one led by Palestinians. Nonetheless, the move by the UK police is welcome. And now for our bad story of the week. In Israel, a viral video has sparked outrage after a visibly Muslim woman was caught on CCTV footage blowing out Hanukkah candles on a menorah display in a Tel Aviv mall. Now, the security footage shows her extinguishing the candles and filming herself proudly as she did so. Not only did she think her little stunt was cute, she even walked back when no one else was around to make sure that she got the very last candle. What kind of hateful loser does this? When they show you who they are, believe them. Police have opened an investigation and are now examining whether charges should be brought. And now our ugly story. So Dave Chappelle this week dropped a new Netflix special and has once again found himself at the center of Jew hatred accusations. Take a look.
Cannot let these do me like Charlie Kirk, or even worse than that. What if these trip me up somehow, co-opt me, and then make me say the things that they want me to say? Well, we can't have that. So, just in case, we need a code. It's got to be something that I can say so that if I say it, you know that these got me. And don't listen to nothing that I say after I say those words. But don't tell anybody what it is, but it's got to be something that, you know what I mean, that I would never say. Oh, I know what the code is. The code word is, I stand with Israel.
So this comedy special was not brave, it was lazy. And Chappelle tried to justify performing in Saudi Arabia by shrugging off its human rights records and then turning around and sneaking in a cheap line about Israel and journalists as if that somehow balances the scale. It does not. It's a false equivalence, and a tired one at that.
These motherfuckers act like because I did a comedy festival in Saudi Arabia, I somehow betrayed my principles. Well, no, I know I didn't. I know. No. They said, well, Saudi Arabia killed a journalist. And rest in peace, Jamal Khashoggi. I'm sorry that he got murdered in such a heinous fashion. But, and no buts, like, you know, period. And also, I mean, look, bro, Israel's killed 240 journalists in the last 3 months. So I didn't know y'all was still counting.
What people are calling out online isn't cancel culture. It's the fact that his show was not funny, not clever, and came from the same loser ideology that I spoke about earlier that blames everyone else for everything wrong in their life. And by everyone else, of course, I mean Jews. Many of Chappelle's jokes reduce complex realities into a soundbite that plays into Jew hatred, appealing ultimately to the lowest common denominator. It's cheap, it's lowbrow, and uneducated. Comedy is supposed to punch up and speak truth. This did neither. It just punched Jews and then called it edgy. And frankly, it shows how far Chappelle has fallen when controversy has replaced humor and facts have been swapped for applause lines. Well, that's it for this week on Axis of Truth. We'll be back with more interviews and more stories from the Middle East soon. I'm Emily Schrader. Be sure to follow me on social media, Emily K. Schrader or Emily in Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching. See you next week on Axis of Truth, only on JNS.